We are having a conversation today because we want to keep the love alive about like these dialogues and conversations about our overall health, beginning with the feet. But from the foot nerd perspective of old, we always like took the feet health, like taking off our shoes and socks and getting our feet on the ground, and then like learning to let our feet be sensors, and then that opens up a world of like other things in the sense of in our sensory world, our intellectual world, and it keeps expanding from there. So that's why in our foot nerd program we would always say that a foot conversation is a whole body conversation. And then in a few conversations with Andy prior, we realized that like what's happening in our world is even a bigger conversation. So you can start at the feet and then it just keeps expanding from there. Our intention is to have conversations that foot nerds want to have. So we're a community of about 200 people across the globe who have been through the Foot Nerd program, which is no longer called the Foot Nerd program anymore. But we are still people who want to have conversations and keeping dialogue alive that might go deeper than just the nuts and bolts of what's happening in our feet, but also including that. So we wanted to, I just wanted to open this up because Andy has some presentations and some things in the works that he's been doing independently, and we want to explore that. So I'm going to hand it over to Andy. He's going to lead the call, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth. I appreciate the opportunity to just kind of share what's on my mind. Um, I wasn't expecting to lead the call, so I feel like I feel like it's probably going to bounce all over the place, not
That's
be
great.
very cohesive. But that's this is the starting. This is like the how the sausage is made. I think for a lot of presentations and a lot of books and things like that, a lot of ideas start this way, and I guess we're making this one public, so that's okay. um, I I I want to say by way of introduction, just that I'm Andy Cook. I have been a foot nerd for as long as there have been foot nerds, and that's been a few years, anyways. And my foot health journey has been longer than that. So I'm at this place in my foot health journey and my whole health journey where I'm starting to really identify with the whole world conversation. Um, just because I've just been more aware of what is happening in the world for people who are on their own health journeys in other places, basically, because everybody living is on a health journey of some sort. Um, so it kind of started because of one is my work. I work with people who have soft tissue injuries in their employers bring me in to care for their soft tissue injuries so that they can avoid the more expensive route of a recordable injury where they have to go to an occupational health doctor or a PT or something like that. And like that gets very expensive for the system and it bogs down the system and it's minimally effective anyways. So they have us come in instead and do soft tissue work for these injuries that are often or almost always repetitive strain injuries, postural injuries, injuries related to their employment, and then related to the fact that most of them in these particular jobs, they're manufacturing facilities um, and yeah, it's oftentimes manufacturing or food processing or something along those lines where the shifts are typically long. The places are typically like the least human you can think of, like as far as like it's very, cubic and concrete and metal, and it's not at all natural. It's not in line with, humanity as I look at it now. And so within this context, we have these people who have these injuries that I have 15 minutes per week to work with them, and they all appreciate it, and they all don't get better because that's 15 minutes versus the other, say, 45 hours a week that they work. And then that's not even considering the amount of time that they actually don't get to rest outside of that. Um, so I've started to think about this in terms of they are victims of unchecked capitalism. I think, like a lot of times, it is shift work, So these people work like 5/12s or something like that, oftentimes, and then have 3 days off, and so there's weird non-routine schedule that you kind of have to base your life around. That's far from circadian. Sometimes it's actual shift work, so it's actual overnight work, which is, I mean, one of these places is an egg processing facility, and I like the only reason that a place like that has to run 24 hours a day is because like the supply, or rather, I'm sorry, the demand. I'm not an economist, so I'm learning a little bit about it, but I'm just enough to have a background. The demand seems to be being manipulated to the point that the supply then has to meet the demand, but I feel that the demand is actually not quite as high as it would, like, I don't know, your Starbucks egg patties and caribou egg patties and you know egg whites in a carton and bags of eggs to go to restaurants. So all of these things are probably needed, but I think that they're probably not needed to be running and working 24 hours a day. This is, again, somewhat uneducated, but it's also that's
No, but just to interject here too, I'm having flashes of the amount, like if I go to the grocery store or I
mm-hmm,
go to a place as it's closing,
yep,
the
yep,
amount of waste,
mm-hmm, yeah,
so like I think that you're talking, I mean, I think you're talking sense
yeah,
because like I've been to the grocery store and it breaks my heart. Like I can't
mm-hmm,
almost look at, like,
yeah,
I watch the little guy who's like at the guy who makes the sushi every day, and then I
mm-hmm,
go at in the evening towards 10 o'clock when the store is closing, and
mm-hmm.
I mean, and they're not allowed to necessarily give that food away, right?
No,
Like
they're
they
not.
have to throw it
Yeah,
away. So
yeah,
you're talking about like gross, like inattention to like human, like I don't even know what to call it, but it's like effed up. So
mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for uh, that's definitely one of my points is like it's kind of a rampant unchecked capitalism sort of idea, right? Where this is definitely not it's not centered on the people doing the consuming, clearly, because there's more, obviously, at that one, like that happens at all of the grocery stores, not just one. Like, so it's at every single grocery store, there's this incredible food waste that's happening because of oversupply, because of over demand, or manipulated demand, it seems like, to profit shareholders, I think. Like, this is my assumption anyways. um, it's not centered on the people, it's centered on the numbers, and that's just kind of led to my idea that capitalism as a whole is pretty inhumane, right? And if you look historically at the history of capitalism, that tracks, that capitalism started officially at the same time that the slave trade kind of officially started, and it has grown in the same way, parallel, and so it does not surprise me to, like, this just doesn't seem like a stretch to me. It doesn't seem like I am being a conspiracy theorist or something when I'm thinking this. It just seems like it's not it's inhumane in the way that you're not thinking about humans. It's thinking about numbers and spreadsheets and profits, which have been easy to manipulate over the last century in particular. And this is where I really got into the weeds, because, like, as we initially talked about, me presenting something to foot nerds or to the foot collective community, it is in the context of um, the problem of individualism and like what I see as a
Can you
way
define
of,
individualism, Andy? Can you define it?
yeah, so individualism would be a focus on the individual, a focus on the self, right? Over everyone else. In historically, I would say even before, I don't even know when, but before um, before capitalism, certainly, and probably before feudalism, maybe. Like before there was a focus on one person being a leader, and before there was early humans were collective. They focused on the collective, right? So um, you would never hear someone worried about their own health versus the health of the community as a whole. That would be unheard of. It's almost, in some traditions, it's like that kind of ego is to be met with shame, right? Is to be met with like almost derided or laughed at by the people in the community, like how that person is thinking so much about themselves, and that's very weird, right? So the focus has always been, and I say always because the hundreds of thousands of years that humans were hunter gatherers and developing as humans before whatever shift happened that led to this focus a little bit less on the community and more on the self, which I think has been very recent, actually. I think that's like a blink of an eye in terms of human history, like overall human history. I think it's been very, very recent. But some of the research that I did, I'm sorry, did that answer your question about what
Hmm.
individualism is, anyways?
Yeah, and it seems kind of obvious just in its root is in the word, but
Yeah.
just in case, like, just for
Yeah, it's just individualism versus, let's say, collectivism, where
right.
it's collective community focused versus individual focused. I have been watching a documentary called The Century of the Self
Hmm.
about, um, well, it's about our last century in the context of um, the focus going from community focus, which even in the United States in the early years, and then, even into like the tens and the 20s, there was a focus on the community. We were not so disconnected. Like um there were tight knit communities all over the place, pockets of communities all over the place, which there still are, but um I'm going less based on the exception at this point. It just seems more and more that the focus has been on the individual versus the collective, and that has benefited the system that we are now talking about. So because um, I'll just say, hmm, here's where we get into the weeds now. Here's where we get lost. um, I think that a lot of um, the bigger atrocities that are happening elsewhere in the world right now, um, there are 8 genocides happening all over the, say, call it the global South, I guess. Palestine comes to mind first of all, and then Sudan and Rwanda. I can't believe that. Like that, I've started hearing about when I was like in high school. Like that's still going on. I can't even fathom that, right? So I feel that these are happening um, because we in the global North, developed countries. I can't stand that term either. Certainly not first world. I can't. No way. Um, the U.S., Canada, Europe. These places are, the consumers of products where the the parts of those products are put together elsewhere or mined elsewhere, or like the iPhone that we get now is parts of cobalt in the Congo, right? And so there's kids strip mining for battery pieces essentially in the Congo to make new iPhones. But in actuality, like these things can easily be recycled. It's just kind of expensive, right? But there are some people that are speaking up about it, um, and then most of us are. And I'm not saying that anyone is wrong in being a certain way here. This is not me trying to be sanctimonious. It's not me trying um, to decry anyone else's way of life, because it is conditioning, because it is something that it has been basically rammed into our subconscious for the last 100 years now, very, very effectively. And so, um,
So into your point, I mean, so I have a tendency, I mean, maybe someone would say hide my head under a rock or like hold
mhm,
the best or all
mhm,
the things, right? Because it's
yep,
too big.
mhm,
Like I mean, you're doing a great job, I think, of like really talking about what's happening and your research from like your experience and like what you know. And normally when I hear conversations like this happening, it feels so big that I'm just like, fuck this. I don't want to talk about
mhm,
this because I can't understand how I'm going to help make it better. Right. Or like, I don't want to like live every day feeling guilty about every freaking thing I do or eat or use, like at the same time, like as you are explaining, I I can like feel myself in my life. Like I have these little flashbacks, like what's my experience and how, like one thing I love that Nick St. Louis did in our Foot Nerd program was like talk about like recognizing our blind spots, which in a way I get the impression that um, you're heading towards that. Like, no, we're not like trying to say like these people are wrong or bad or whatever, regardless of like how we personally feel in our opinions and where the blame lies and all of that. But like, I think you are headed towards like looking each individual looking at our blind spots, right? And then but I've been unnerved by how I feel like I'm a loving, tender-hearted, giving person with my own faults, but like my instinct is to always be part of like a community physically. But as the screen time has grown and as my world is like less, I mean, since we went through the lockdown of the pandemic and stuff, my world has kind of closed in to the point which like now I'm more comfortable not around people than I am around fleshy people. And I can feel the desensitization from that. Like I'm armored for some reason, and I think it's because of a lot of what you're saying. Conditioning, more screen time, less in-person time. Everybody has a customizable personal life, whether it's your playlist on your iPhone or your car, where you're always alone. You don't have to carpool together anymore. Um, and so all the like real human things that we see are like on our sitcoms, where they're like living a whether it's The Office or do you know what I'm saying? Or like shows where like that's where I find where I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't live at all like that, but I can see that that's how I would want to live if I did live. And so all that is to say is like as you're talking about individualism, I can feel it happening in my own life on a very subtle scale that is like desensitizing me more and more to what's happening around me, even in my own neighborhood.
mhm.
And then like which makes it even more difficult to like see the bigger picture that you're hinting at and stuff. So
Thank you, thank you. That's absolutely the case, I would say, and exactly my point. I think um, I love the idea of just inviting people to recognize their blind spots. I think that that's a very nice way of putting it. And I again, just to not um, talk down on people. because it, as you say, like this has been so effectively multi-generationally at this point. There have been several generations of this process that I'm speaking of, um, that have happened, and it's getting more and more intense, and it seems like it's getting easier and easier for, let's call it empire, right? So like I just kind of consider now like Western imperialism, this global collective group of wealthy people and businesses, and I just kind of think of that as empire still, like that is still happening, and that is what is benefiting from our individual feeling of helplessness, because it does seem monumentally too big, right? Like we can cover a few of the things that I have done, but basically, like all of this has pointed for me to the idea that we can't actually be whole healed humans unless we are really um, not even part of a community, but really giving ourselves to the community. Like there are um, hunter gatherer traditions where a person comes of age and like then they no longer have a self. Like kids have selves, adults are part of the collective, they work towards the good of the collective, and that's um, what I think is missing, and what my theory is that many who are experiencing very long-term chronic health conditions, um, that say they've been through many providers and like they can't actually find the answer, the root cause or anything like that. I think there's a missing piece, and it would be service. It would be um, giving of yourself to the people that need it, because there are a lot of people that need service. I it just, and again, this is like, where do you start, right? Like, where does this even start? Especially when I'm talking about cell phones and the Congo, and I'm talking about, what's happening in Palestine right now has really been a turning point for me personally, because, like, talk about helplessness. Like, or even like in the population of the places that are supporting the oppressor of that engagement, Israel, the United States and the United Kingdom in particular have been very actively, because they've always historically supported Israel. Um, so the people in even people in Israel, right, and then people in the United Kingdom and people in the United States are all saying to the leaders, "Stop this from happening. This has been going on for far too long. It's criminal, like literal war crimes. It's literal genocide that we get to watch every single day, should we choose to." Um, and we are telling our leaders to represent us and what we want, and they are saying, no, we are actually going to do this instead. We are going to continue supporting by providing arms and financial support to Israel, which is, in this particular case, not the victim of what's happening, right? So um, that has been like really, uh, I have been leaning into the feelings of helplessness, because I mean, I am like this guy in Minnesota who, doesn't have a lot of money to donate to um, situations like that, and certainly doesn't feel empowered to, like, I have contacted my representatives and I have written letters and I have been doing things that may or may not seem, helpful to the situation. Um, but I feel that even in that helplessness that I have been experiencing about that, because it has been a very helpless feeling to be someone who cares about people watching the awful stuff that is happening. Um, I have also been experiencing a certain sense of, anecdotally, a certain sense of peace within myself about it. Like, not that like, "Ah, I'm doing enough now." Like, I'm like patting myself on the back because I'm doing things for people. But leading up to this, like my own health journey, particularly with mental health over the past 3, 4, 5 years, um, I have had a very challenging journey, and I have been in very, very low places, and I have struggled in a very real way. And and I have been healing stepwise, slowly but surely. But like initially there was this idea I was focusing on myself and I was prioritizing myself. I was, putting on my oxygen mask first and everything like that. Lately I have been feeling, and I have been um, supported by some of my research, that I think there's a point at which that has to shift. Like we can not focus on ourselves until we're good enough to help other people. Like we really, I feel, have to focus on ourselves. Yeah, until we're good enough, but good enough has to be a much lower threshold. Like,
So
um,
ask you a question here because like in a certain way, it was also in the Foot Nerd manifesto like that we would have like open um what did Nick call them, like productive disagreements and stuff, and like
mhm,
looking at our blind spots. Like I really loved this education, this year-long education, because of like this openness to bigger picture and like expanding. So in a certain sense, like you're kind of challenging what I say almost every day, like taking care of yourself takes care of all of us, which in a certain way is true, right? But like you're talking about like maybe it's, I mean, you're heading in the direction of like maybe that's not from your experience, that like putting on your own oxygen mask first, um like that this is multifaceted, right? So like maybe taking care of your physical health is definitely important so that you're not a burden to the people that you love long term, or even short term for that matter. But like the idea of like I'm interested to see where you're going with this, because it's like I in my brain as you're talking, I'm like trying to look for my blind spots and then like address them like in our conversation, so that like
mhm.
we have concrete examples, like not only from your experience but like dialogue wise what's happening. And like you're in Minnesota, I'm in the United States, South, and like how our experiences are similar or different. But like, but that is kind of what we say, like take care of yourself first, and there is like nuance, right? Because anyway, I just wanted to say that, like, well, that kind of just, and I've been hearing this more, you'll be glad to know, from like my nephews who are 17 and 18. They're like, it's not about putting your own oxygen mask on first. It's about like looking around you and seeing what somebody else needs. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing examples around me of all this
Mhm.
stuff happening.
Yes, exactly. I think, and it's, of course there's nuance, and of course, like if we are in, you know, so much pain that we can barely move ourselves, it's very hard to expect that person to, um, let's say, do a Meals on Wheels program or something like that, where you have to move relatively heavy things, you have to move around, you have to, take a lot of stairs, you have to just, but this is a program that delivers food to people who can't otherwise have, um, good healthy food, right? So it's like, I mean, churches put it on. They make good food and then deliver it to people in their community. Like that's a lovely, lovely thing. That would be a concrete example, but I again would not expect a person who has just broken their leg to be a part of the Meals on Wheels program. But I would say that even as a part of their self-care, like even as a part of their physical movement self-care, like we want people to move every day, like I would love to see some of that movement being like physical movement towards, uh, like mowing the neighbor's lawn or something, and that should count towards like my self-care, right? So
Right.
that's, kind of what I'm going to is that, how can service to others fit in and be part of my self-care in relating to global atrocities. A lot of a lot of um, current self-care gurus talk about the importance of just of well, self-actualization. First of all, is like this priority that many of them purport, and um, and even Maslow, who created and observed that pyramid or that hierarchy of needs, later figured out, or even then figured out, and it's been taken out of context, that self-actualization is actually like it's the bottom of another pyramid where there is community actualization, and then world actualization are the next one. So these are like those are the actual tops of the pyramid, or the actual like the truly um, actualized person is like, again, has no self. They focus on the other. They focus on the community, right? So um, just in the idea that there are many people that are like, if your mental health can't handle um, seeing all of these terrible things, then what you need to do is stop going on social media and seeing them, right? And I feel that um well, I mean, what a glorious privilege that we have to be able to just like shut out something that is happening to other humans that are just like us, just in a different place. And so I, for one, have kind of refused to do that at this point. Like with this particular thing, like every day I've been very intentionally ignoring the impulse to scroll past some of those stories and some of those videos, and because it's citizen journalism that is um, getting that word from Palestine to the rest of the world. It is people's phones. That's people's experiences, and it's very, very sad, and it has been breaking my heart every single day. But in the same way, I feel that checking on your neighbor, just feeling the impulse to check on your neighbor and caring about your neighbor, like not ignoring someone else's plight, I think, because they're also human and that's really sad. Um, Not ignoring their plight is also what I'm talking about. That's also doing something. I mean, that's almost like what can be done oftentimes, because I think with that consciousness, with that awareness, um, can possibly come some action from that. Some decisions can be made in one's life that will lead to um, the end of a genocide, for instance. Like that has to happen on a very grand scale, but it really does have to start somewhere. And I think starting by not ignoring it is really um, a very big first step, I think. And this is something that I think has been echoed in like the experiences of the people who, like, there are a lot of Palestinian people here who are not there in Palestine. And so they are, watching their family and friends experience this, and then they're watching the rest of the world not talk about it at all. Like, this has made me really, it's made me ashamed of celebrity culture, because like there's no, or very, very, very few people who have influence in our lives talking about this thing that, if more people talked about it, something could potentially happen. Um, I feel I feel disempowered politically, but at the same time, I think that I'm not actually disempowered politically. It's just there hasn't been the appropriate tipping point that has led to, like, um, one of the things that led to the end of apartheid South Africa was global boycott and divestment of companies that supported apartheid South Africa. There are many companies in the United States and in Europe that support apartheid Israel, and there is a movement for boycotting many of these companies. Um, and I feel that if more people knew about it, that would actually make an impact. Because I think that if you are affecting an organization's money at this point in where we live and how we live now, if you are, if that might affect the decisions that they are making, and it is, I'm seeing, um, and I just saw a headline about this, and I have not read into it at all, but like there are some University of California campuses that are divesting a lot of their programs, um, because Israel puts a lot of money into surveillance and satellite positioning and things like that. And I forget which campus in the University of California system. It was their students that decided collectively, like, we don't want our program to be associated with this at all. And so they have divested from whatever program they were connected with, and they have been encouraging all of the other California, University of California systems to do the same. Right. So this is led by students, not by faculty and not by deans, but by the students. And that's a real, like, these are a bunch of people who care enough to um, take action because they have not been ignoring or unaware. Like I would say, like, in my life, in my real world life, like every person that I mention this to is like, oh, what's going on in Palestine? Unfortunately, many of us are uh, either wage slaves, as you say, we work a lot and don't make enough money, or we work a lot and make enough money, but it's wrapped up in debt. It's wrapped up in either medical debt or student loan debt or some other mortgage debt, whatever unreasonable form of consumer debt we have, that probably makes up that 10 to 20% right there in a lot of people's lives. Like, I think that and I think that that comes back to the individual piece, because I think a lot of that debt has come from acquiring things that we may or may not actually need. So I feel that the way that I've been setting up my household, the way that my partner and I have been setting up our household, has been very intentional, to the point that um, we went through a deck of, it's called a fair play deck, fair play cards, to ensure that there are no invisible burdens that my partner, who has two young children, we have two young children, but she cares for them at home. But we have gone through to ensure that there are no invisible burdens that she is carrying that I don't know about. And so basically, we have divided the labor in the house. And the cool thing is, this is with the priority of actually, you care for yourself. Like, you have self-care and grooming is one of the things that you consider. Like, both partners have self-care and grooming, adult friendships, and unicorn space, where it's like you have to have space for something that you're passionate about in your life, and that has to be protected by either your partner or someone else
This
to
is in the fair
ensure.
play deck.
It's called,
This
yeah,
is
it's called the Fair Play Deck. Yes.
okay.
And it was a woman wrote a book because so many women in patriarchy are shouldering a very, very unfair burden, whether or not their partner is out winning all the financial, getting all the bread for their house. That partner is still, being a mother is also a full-time job at home. So then you have the mother being a full-time job at home, and then you have the homemaker being a full-time job at home.
The
So it's
reproductive labor, that's called the
reproductive labor. Yeah. So all of these things are generally not considered in the patriarchy, and usually it's kind of like the man goes out and does the work, or the there's one partner who goes out and wins all the bread, and then another partner who manages the household. But the managing of the household is actually like three jobs, three 40-hour a week jobs, and not just one 40-hour a week job. And this is not even thinking of the fact that jobs aren't even 40 hours a week anymore. They're usually closer to 45 or 50, and you got to consider commuting. So it's like we have had to
And usually
basically,
women are also caring, I
and
mean,
they
caring
have
for children
jobs too.
and jobs. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they
So
have jobs as well. And so there's an unfair burden that the women are shouldering in our patriarchal system. Um, we have we have tried to um, mitigate this with these fair play cards, right? So we both have these things that are essential for human health, community, friendship, and something to be passionate about, and we have that time protected. And then we have divided like the labor of the house equally to
Mhm.
us, anyways, equally for our lives. Um, and then we're accountable to those things, and so we're accountable to our partner, and we have to make sure that those things get done. And we know that if those things don't get done, like that affects our partner and their experience, right? So we've basically had to redesign our entire life around this. So I actually work my actual income hours is like I work like 20 hours a week. Like I work very little, um, very little actual income earning time. The rest of my time is spent helping to parent and manage the household. And I think that th- I am considering it anti-capitalist to a certain extent. Um, it's still, you know, we live within a capitalist system, and I still consume things, and I still, I'm not perfect, but I'm trying, right? And so I think that lives need to be completely reconfigured. Like you can't go to work and come home and parent for a couple hours before bedtime and expect anything to be different in any number of years. Even if you are saving money and even if you are making decisions and checking in weekly with your partner and everything like that, which I would gather many partners are not checking in with each other regularly and having regular meetings and things like that because I guess my evidence would be, you know, levels of consumer debt and um, levels of decision making that people thinking about themselves and their future, they would not make those decisions, right? But they're making those decisions now because they're being influenced by the systems that we live in. As I've tried to elucidate in the beginning uh, that the attack on our subconscious that is telling us to be individualist consumers is is very significant, and so it's not to be ignored, and it's not to be it needs to be considered. And um, I'm very fortunate that I have a job that pays me well enough that I can work 10 hours a week at it and be able to like still be the quote unquote breadwinner in the house, right? Like that is my privilege that I am stating here for. Like this is like that is a very privileged position that I am in, and that means that to me, my responsibility in in response to that, to having that privilege, would be to go outward, right? Like now, I certainly have the capacity to really do something for someone else, um, be it financially, we're getting there, be it financially or with time in a direct community or consciously, as I've been talking about, where you're just, giving your awareness. Because, I mean, in reference to the pipeline issue that this was like right at the beginning of right around COVID where this happened, if I'm not mistaken. Like I kind of remember like the Dakota Access Pipeline. There have been constant protests, and this is um, like I was vocal in resharing stories about that on social media too, and was actually like shouted down as virtue signaling at that time, which fortunately, like, I have basically devoted my entire Instagram now. My current Instagram has just basically resharing stories and resharing reels and things like that about what is happening in Palestine. So I'm like donating my own attention and the attention of my following, and probably losing many followers because of it, because they're not there to learn about that from me. But I don't feel good posting self-care tips about things if I'm not also giving the context of like, hey, this is what's happening in the rest of the world. You should probably know about this. I feel much more strongly that you should probably know about this. And I would gladly give every single one of my followers, they can all unsubscribe. Like that would be fine by me. And I would feel like um that was still my responsibility, I felt, because of the privilege that I have, um, in place and time, right? Like we are so um yeah, I feel like lives need to be redesigned. Like we can't expect to continue doing the same thing and expect different results. So if we actually, like, now that we, some of us are aware, like we really now need to like make real decisions about how we're spending our time and how we're spending our money, and those things um, can oftentimes, some of that can go towards service of others, I guess, would be the best way that I would look at it, I think. But it has to be, it's so intentional, like it has to be so intentional because it has to be habitual. Otherwise, um, status quo is so significant that we would, like you said, you became an individualist and you didn't even realize it. Like that's probably everyone, right? That's like, we all love people, we're all loving people, we're humans. Like we're not born with hatred in our hearts, and even if we do have hatred in our hearts, we probably also, that's probably because of some pain, and some healing has to come from that. But really, I think the vast majority of us care deeply about everyone, and then are conditioned outside of that to feel like we're othering somebody, or like some inconvenience that is caused is affecting our lives, and so that um, makes us feel um, like othering someone, like making somebody not be able to deserve the full extent of the love that we have for all of humanity, right? But I do think that we inherently have a love for humanity if we are aware of it. And I think that we, if, mm, I think that the level of, again, unchecked capitalism that is happening now is happening because there's just been this effective campaign of making us all unconscious individual people,
Consumers.
consumers,
Consumers, yeah.
right? So um, it will require, again, I think, just first awareness and then a redesigning of life in order to basically um, subvert that. Like I think that there's like the idea of changing it seems overwhelming. First of all, the idea, like I don't feel like I could vote for someone in the next 20 years even that would actually make significant changes from the top down, right? So, of course, changes should probably come from the bottom up, anyways. They tend to be more effective if they're coming from the bottom up. And that, I think, includes our identities. So, like changing our identities, changing our awareness, and then stepping up from there. Um, and then, yeah, doing something for your community, or like some people are protesters and so they go and protest and they make changes that way, and some people um, are good cooks and so they go and devote their time cooking and feed homeless people, and some people are good organizers and so they organize the people that are feeding people, and like we can play to our individual strengths to support like the, I think it has to be the global whole, though. I think the consideration can be in the community, because I think that the only thing I can do short of, I mean, I don't even think going to Palestine and doing anything is going to, like, that's not going to do anything except put me in harm's way as well. But I feel like, you know, some people are going to feel strongly about something and donate money to it. And some people are going to feel strongly about something and donate time. And some people are going to do both, depending on capacity and depending on the like level of awareness and level of giving and level of like the philosophical depths to which you want to dive into this, right? Where you maybe decide that you don't want to buy anything for yourself and you're zero sum budgeting all the way to like, I need exactly what I need in my life, and then everything else is going to other people. There's going to be people that do that, absolutely, and that's going to make a
Yeah.
change for sure. Like,
Yeah, and I would even say, I mean, we probably should wrap it up here, but
Hmm.
I would even say that a very powerful step would be just to try interacting with people who are just so different from yourself. Like
Mm.
um go to a place that you wouldn't normally go, that or interact with people who don't think the same as you, and find common ground. I mean, one of the ways that we do that is we go out and we play sports with people. We try to engage with our communities in ways where like you can like sort of feel that you have common ground as humans. You're playing, you're not so in the head, you're throwing a frisbee, or just being with people where you are just people and living and interacting kind of just primes the pump for all that I think you have been
Hmm.
talking about for the last 90 minutes.
Hmm. And I think even finding a community of people who have been othered to you, right? Like there's a lot of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia that's really very common right now, and most of it is based on a total lack of knowledge of those people, of those
Right.
other people. And so I would even say going a step further and finding a whole group of
Yeah.
other people and interacting with them, right? Like
Right.
um I think that those things could go a long way, because I think that it's easy to, like, I don't know, I think I know in person one person who is from Palestine. So it would be very easy for me to just kind of discount everything that's happening there because I don't know anyone. And even in my direct community, there are not very many um, Middle Eastern people, and so.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I definitely just think that like being with people
Mhm.
and just be with people and go and at the smallest level, case by case basis. Um, I mean, yeah, I think we're at the risk at this point of like we probably need to schedule another time to talk about other stuff, because like we
Mhm.
that's a lot to unpack in 90 minutes. So I would
Yes.
say like let's start with ourselves, our feet, our health, but not just like always putting on our own oxygen mask first and not misunderstanding what that actually means. And then yeah, and then like maybe closing comments, Andy. I mean, you've said it already. You're like, well, requires us to think differently about how we design our lives, right?
Mhm.
Um, so like you've talked about like decreasing your hours in order to uh, play a bigger role in your family dynamics and the reproductive labor going on at home, and sharing all of that, and that grows then like uh, that grows a flowering community within your own home, which
Mhm.
is kind of where it starts, right? Like the people in your direct household are where you start building your love and caring and attention to like a global family. And if that isn't intact, then what's the point? I mean, that's my take, is like if your people right around you and your relationships aren't intact and like have some sense of health there,
Mhm.
then there's no point in like
I
other
do agree. I think household does have to be at a certain level of health. Like, I think that
yeah.
that's like I think that you're not going to have this awareness
Yeah, and that might
unless you've been really intentional already, which at that point you're probably aware of these things. Like if you,
and we
I
don't
think.
even have like you realize that before we had all of us had like screens, and life has become so like heady, where like farming we're not farming our food. We go, we're not like living like humans are kind of designed to live, and we're evolving into something different, that we wouldn't even use words like intention or awareness. It would just be, and like you hear this all the time about how like if you go to another culture, some of the language we use is not understood, because like you're just a human living and caring for your families and getting your food, and from just like tending to the the family unit and then the community unit, that in and of itself brings a level of like peace and fulfillment that just naturally unfolds as like part of a human life that we're going like we have to like turn everything upside down and on its head in order to feel not depressed, not isolated. And when you're talking about, to me it seems like you're talking about the very things that make us human and fulfilled and evolved in a certain way, like with happiness and joy and laughter and grief too, like all of that, and love, all is like a part of a mix of a human life, but that like we have to go backwards now because we live so artificially and kind of bloated, like this bloated sort of economic system that we're in, that we have to kind of untangle all of that to just get back to like what it means to just be a human being.
Hmm.
And then I just want to close with this because like you mentioned something I think that's like really interesting about like how you work 20 hours a week. And something that has been on my mind a lot lately is like how the question is like how do we become the kind of people who want and need less? Like I think Dave Matthews quote is like something there's a song that's like all I want is what I've not got, and what all I have is what I don't know, but like essentially how do we want what we have and not like need for like all of this extra. So
Hmm.
one of the things that my husband and I have done over time is we've actually limited our wealth purposefully so that we can have like be time rich and be like not and be aware, not be like exhausted all the time, and that like we have the time and ability to care for each other and ourselves and even then it's like still very difficult to just like check in on a neighbor sometimes. I mean, I exaggerate that to a certain degree, but like
Hmm.
that just to illustrate the point. But I think that's an interesting place is like redesigning a life where you're like, I'm going to work 20 hours and um, I'm not going to keep trying to like make millions and millions of dollars or whatever. I'm just going to try to like live within the means and like create a life that's like very worth living, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would just say um, that's a very good way of closing it up. I feel like that's a very succinct way of looking at it.
So we'll come back and maybe dig in again because I think that
Hmm.
these are like really conversations that are like I think kind of risky. People don't want to necessarily talk about this stuff, but
I've been very nervous about even pushing this out. Like I feel like I'm confronting people, and I don't. That's not something that is my strength personally. So I definitely have felt like very very reticent to put myself out there, so to speak,
mhm,
and talk about this, especially because it's so completely unformed, or it's like a
mhm,
collection of bubbles in my brain right now that are really just starting to get somewhere.
mhm.
Um,
And I think it's just nice. It's really nice to have another human or group of humans to actually be able to have these conversations with
mhm.
and not be. I mean, because it does take courage. So thank you for being willing, and we'll decide if we want to put it out to the public or not because we get to decide.
I mean, I'd like to at this point. I feel like I was nervous. I was nervous initially, but like talking to you has given me some amount of bravery and has been um, uh, validating, I guess.
Mhm,
So I appreciate that a lot. I appreciate you and your awareness, like you're looking at yourself and hearing what I was saying and not feeling accused, because I feel like that would be really easy to just be like, I mean, some of the things I've said have been like I have heard them from people in the Foot Collective community, so it's like
yeah.
I I feel nervous to push against that, but at the same time, like that's I think now we're entering a place where like it could be someone's life's work to push against that very easily. Like
Yeah.
I could dedicate all of myself, like all of my available capacity to that at this point, and I think that I would be very satisfied for that, and I think that um yeah, I appreciate you for helping me start it.
It's my pleasure. Okay, Andy, we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth.